No, you don't need the.
I'm doing this my way.
He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend.
Talking on it though, then
He
you
a
can't work
legend.
it up later.
Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Michael with another video for League of Items. The finals for the Midseason Cup were earlier today, and Top Esports was victorious. So anybody who has been watching my recent content on SBR Sports, DFS Bachelor, on my channel, on my Twitter feed, knows that I expected FPX to win. I think that they should have been the favorite going into the finals, but because of the way that the announcers kind of favored Top Esports and like talked about Knight a lot, it makes sense that the sportsbook would release Top Esports as the favorite, because that would seem to be the public sentiment. And I haven't really gotten a lot of like backlash or pushback against this specific like choice that I made or bet that I made, but a lot of the time you'll get people responding to videos and stuff like that saying, oh well, you got your last pick wrong, and that doesn't really bother me. The thing that bothers me is like it's implied when somebody says something like that, they're questioning your process, and often questioning your ability to project things in the future. So before I get like into the games, I wanted to quickly talk about how I look at matchups and how I look at gambling and why I think it's important. So yes, I'm just using this example specifically. We're going to explore like the concepts that I use for sports betting. So first, I guess the place to start is the specific example from yesterday. So on SBR picks, I was talking about the chances of FPX to win. So when I talk about the chances of a team to win, I think about all of the I try to think about all of the different scenarios that would potentially take place. So let's say theoretically they played a match against each other 10,000 times to give us a large sample size. In that pool, you would have what's called a range of outcomes. So the range of outcomes, in my opinion, would say that FPX would win more often than they would lose, just based off of the things that I'm taking into consideration and the different weight that I give them. So one of the things that I weigh is public sentiment and whether or not I think it's realistic. And most of the time it's not realistic. We may disagree about that, but I just think for the most part, going against public perception will often give you a little edge, like not necessarily a 5 or 10% edge, which would be actionable for betting, but at least a few percentage points. Because what it does when public perception is out of whack, it takes that range of outcomes and it changes some of those outcomes that are closer to the 50-50 mark. So if we're looking at a 51% outcome that should benefit FPX because of public perception, they may think that it would actually favor Top Esports, but for different like reasons, there's just that disconnect or difference of opinion of where I am and where somebody else is. Because I think that most people agree. Well, actually, most people don't even agree about this. So I'll leave that for a different video potentially. So let's just talk about the range of outcomes thing again. Another issue that we might run into is like the use of different words. So I just want to talk about the difference between projecting something and predicting something. So let's take a look at the definition of the two words, because it's a good place to start. Like, I mean, I used to do this a lot when I used to write papers. Like, I have an academic background, and I think that defining your terms is very useful, and we're going to do that now. So first I looked up the word project because I often talk about projections, and I think that this definition is pretty good. So it says project, obviously we want the verb. Verb means estimate or forecast something on the basis of present trends. Right? So you could look at this and say, well, the present trends would say that top esports should have won the final match. But that's where the public perception is at its worst, because the public perception is something that is more susceptible to like psychological pitfalls and like the assumption that something is going to continue into the future. So when I look at things, I'm looking at like the reasons why they were able to win the game as opposed to the result of a game. It's just different. it's just different. So when I'm doing this, I'm trying to project the different outcomes into the future. I'm not trying to predict the specific outcome with any like. I'm not trying to predict with 100% certainty. And I think that's where the disconnect is for the most part. So when we say predict or to make a prediction, we say or estimate what I say or estimate that will happen in the future or will be a consequence of something. So I would say prediction means to make a prediction means to say or estimate something that will happen in the future or will be a consequence of something. I think colloquially, when we talk about predictions, what we're really saying is with 100% certainty, because that's the only way that you could respond to one of my videos or bets with like that kind of reaction that says, you got something wrong. It's like, haha, look, you're not perfect. And the goal is never to be perfect. The goal is to win enough bets to beat the sportsbook, and that's it. Like, I've never pretended. Well, actually, I have pretended to get everything right. Like when I'm joking around, I don't actually think that I'm going to get every single game right, but I have a pretty good track record. So I'm confident in my ability to predict the results of games based on projections and how I look at things. So I'm willing to make that bet. So I guess there is some kind of implied like hubris or like self-confidence in my ability to do that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be willing to make that bet. But that's just something I wanted to clear up. So then let's talk about the range of outcomes, because we're going to get into the range of outcomes again when we start looking at the pick ban phase, because there's a difference between like we basically have to answer the question, do we believe that League of Legends is deterministic? And it's obvious that the answer is no. Like okay, I might get in trouble for saying something like that. So League of Legends is deterministic because all of the inputs cause the outcomes that you see on the screen. There are some random things that happen with the random number generator, like critical strike chance. But what I'm getting at is nobody believes that the pick ban phase determines with 100% certainty, aka giving the ability to predict the outcome, the result of a specific game. So when somebody like LS says a team won the draft, it means that they've improved their chances to win the game, and they have kind of shifted the range of outcomes from pre-draft to post-draft more in their favor, right? I think that's a pretty fair way to look at it. I might want to write that one down once I'm done with this video. But let's take a look at the drafts. So I'm gonna mute this. So before these games started, one of the questions that I received a bunch of times was, does blind pick benefit FPX or top esports more? And my response was it's not knowable. We cannot say with any certainty which team is better in a blind pick scenario, because the way that we weigh things is going to be very different. So I've never tried to put together a model that can predict or project like a range of outcomes that says FPX is better than top esports at blind picks. And the reason why it's so difficult is because you have so much less information on the draft side to react to the opponent. So it's a lot less sophisticated than the normal structured drafts that we have, because you're not reacting to the enemy at all. You're just reacting to the game itself. And you can try to anticipate what the enemy is going to do, but that's very difficult. So most of the time, I think, in pick bans, blind picks, you're going to have teams just play what they think is the best and hope that it counters the enemy team. So in the first game, the blind pick, this is eventually what we're going to see on the Rift, right? So let's talk about the individual picks and if I think they make sense in a blind pick scenario. So in my opinion, on patch 10.10, I've said this over and over again, I think that we have a jungle carry meta, and that on its own is a point of contention with the League of Legends community, because we have a difference of opinion in like how the game is actually won. So I would say that the meta is determined by the game itself. It's not determined by what players think is strong or what's popular. It's what is actually strong. Like, how can we measure different champions, different items, different game states? The things that I use to try to figure that out, and I should emphasize the word try, the way that I try to look at things is different from how most of the League of Legends community looks at it. And I don't think it's necessarily better because it's different from what they're doing, but I feel like it's more honest and accurate because it's a closed system. The game is a closed system. Things don't change from game to game. Things do change from patch to patch, but we can anticipate how those changes will impact the game better by relying on the game system itself and the value of items, the value of champion statistics, as opposed to what is going to become popular, because it's really difficult to anticipate how people are going to respond to changes and predict how they will react, because humans are often unpredictable. So let's start in the jungle, and we can talk about the player and the champion they chose. So first, for top esports, Karsa picks Lee Sin, and the broadcasters, especially in Korea, will always criticize Lee Sin as a pick because of its win rate, and it hasn't performed well from a results perspective for a while. And you can take that with a grain of salt, because a lot of the times the people who are picking Lee Sin aren't necessarily taking the matchup into consideration. It's more about comfortability and their skill on a champion. So Lee Sin has been a very popular champion for the entirety of League of Legends, really. it fluctuated, and sometimes it's considered good and sometimes it's considered bad, but there are always specific matchups that that are good and bad for Lee Sin. So he's always a viable option because so many players are good at Lee Sin, right? FPX, on the other hand, went with Graves. So Tian, who also plays a lot of Lee Sin, I think, chose Graves. And I think this is a reaction to I think this is a choice that they made based on the game itself and the meta that has shifted. So we don't always see the meta and the game in agreement on what's strong, but right now I think that the meta and the perception of Graves is accurate, that he is a very strong champion. So now it's like FPX wasn't willing to play this during the playoffs, the last playoffs in LPL, but now they've done more testing, they've gotten more comfortable with the champion, and they feel like it can fit with their team. And I think Graves is just a great champion right now. I think he's very strong, and on this patch, I think it's correct for them to pick Graves. So from this right here, I think that the advantage in the jungle is on FPX's side, because if we play this game 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, I think that the Graves will be able to create the winning edge for their team more often than Lee Sin could create a winning advantage for his team. And I'm not going to go to that next part. So let's leave it there for now. Now we have FPX in the top lane. We'll go top down at this point. Wukong versus Ornn. So again, anybody who has watched my channel for a long time knows how much I love Ornn. I made videos about Ornn right when he came out, because I thought that the upside that his items brought to the game were extremely valuable. Back then it was different because you had to spend additional gold in order to upgrade your items, but even with that taken into consideration, he was still an extremely strong champion. He had a shield on his W. Like, just imagine this broken champion with a shield on his W. Like, the trading was out of control. It was always a very strong champion, but it was never a popular champion. And that's what frustrates me with the League of Legends community, is that there are changes in the meta and public perception that are not based on the right things. Like, within one patch, the opinion of a champion can fluctuate greatly, even though the strength of a champion is consistent for the entirety of the patch. Now, you could make the argument that the popularity of different champions in a meta may shift, which allows other champions to be played or not played. Because if there was a hard counter to Ornn in the laning phase, Ornn would become basically like an unusable champion, because every time that you locked in Ornn, the enemy would lock in champion X, which destroys Ornn. Or outscales Ornn, or provides something for the team that Ornn doesn't. Like, a lot of different variables. And I think that's somewhat correct. But if you're a team that is always looking for these champions that have huge upsides and can give you like fringe outcomes to play to, then Ornn would always have made sense as a counter pick. And he was never really used as a counter pick. And that may have more to do with top lane not being the highest priority. But I think it's a mistake. I think that there's just a lot of mistakes with with the way that we look at things in League of Legends, and most of the people who have the ability to change things don't really want to, and I think they don't want to because they don't really need to. Like, everything's kind of working fine now, everybody's making money, but if you like love the game and want the game to progress and be played at its optimal level, there's a lot of missed opportunity out there. So if we're looking at these champions again, I think that Ornn is a better champion than Wukong. I think that Wukong has been proven to not really be that great. He has some good games and he has some bad games, and he has a very wide range of outcomes where he can help your team a ton and he can hurt your team a ton, because if he falls behind, he's just not going to be anywhere near as impactful. And that just, I don't know if that's really debatable. Like, I'd be curious to hear someone's reason for why Wukong is a good champion right now, but I think most people agree that it's not a very good champion right now, or at least not one of the best champions right now. I think with Ornn, he's a lot more consistent, and you can expect Ornn to contribute to the team in a positive way more often than you can depend on Wukong. So in a blind pick scenario, I think the Wukong is very dangerous because there are a lot of champions that beat Wukong very hard in lane. There are not a lot of champions that beat Ornn very hard in lane. So I wonder what FPX was anticipating Top Esports to pick. Maybe they thought it was going to be an Aatrox or something like that, but I'm not familiar with the Aatrox versus Wukong line matchup, so I can't really speak to that. In the mid lane, this was one of the easier things to predict because of the champion pool of these two players and what they're the best on. So Knight is a very good Syndra player, very good LeBlanc player, very good Zoe player, because he's a very good player. Douenby is also a very good player, but he's much different from most mid laners. So his mid lane champion pool is often more team focused, and I think that Galio is extremely strong right now. I think that Galio versus Syndra is a very interesting matchup because there's a lot of stuff that Galio can do to help his team deal with a Syndra. And I think even though that the game didn't play out the way that they may have wanted it to, I would love to watch them play this like 5 times and see how all these champions interact with each other long term. And then in the bot lane we have Varus Thresh versus Varus Thresh, and they made some different choices in terms of like their build that they wanted to go and their summoner spells, but we're not really going to get into the differences in that situation because it's like splitting hairs. But let's get into the game. So we get into the game. I'm going to jump around. I don't really want to watch this whole game again. So Khan lived. Then we had an interesting exchange in the bot lane. Lee Sin pathed down, and I think that's one of the only reasons why Jackie Love allowed himself to get hooked, because if he knew the hook was going to land, he could have flashed out. But I think they knew that they would get first blood if the hook landed anyways. So then we have Varus getting a kill and the other team getting first blood, so that's a 200 gold differential. Then we have Ornn die, I believe, in the top lane. Yeah. So that was a replay of the first blood. So now it's 2-1, and even though FPX has 2 kills and Top Esports has 1 kill, they have a 500 gold advantage because of first blood and the difference between Galio and Syndra in lane. Syndra has an easier time farming than Galio does because of a ranged advantage. 3-2. So this is very close. This was actually probably one of the first turning points of the game, right? I think that there's an extended fight very soon. So this was a good job by FPX getting those 2 turret plates for the Rift Herald, because the Rift Herald's only going to give you 2 plates. So as long as you trade 2 plates for the Rift Herald, it should be good. So right there, they spent the resources of teleport to go up. Karsa makes a good play. And this is really what I wanted to talk about with the Graves and Lee Sin matchup. So I think that objectively, Graves is a better champion than Lee Sin right now. I think that Graves helps his team in more game states than Lee Sin does right now, because Lee Sin does fall off extremely hard, whereas Graves can just continuously farm and scale better than Lee Sin does. But if you are going to win this matchup as Lee Sin against Graves, you have to play it this way. And I think that's why Karsa did such a great job in this game, is because Karsa played to his win condition. He didn't just pick a champion, have FPX pick Graves, and then say, oh, they picked Graves. We lose the game if they outscale. So I guess we just have to lose now. We just have to play passively and lose. And a lot of teams do that. They may not consciously do that or understand that they're doing that, but by not pushing the pace and fighting over objectives and looking for risky ganks, you're essentially saying we're fine with the game scaling. We'll play you in this like eventual team fight, but then at that point they're already outscaled. That's a very frustrating thing to watch as well. But in this game, Karsa did a great job of staying ahead of Graves and continuously looking for picks, continuously looking to fight Graves or pick off Graves, invade the jungle, and that happened because like his team was also playing around the win condition correctly. And again, now we can talk a little bit about the whole determinism thing. I do not think that Top Esports won this game because of a draft. I think that they won this game because of their execution. And that's an important distinction to make, because one of them you can only do so much in the draft. You can only get yourself into a winning position in the draft, but winning a game doesn't happen in the draft often. Like you're not going to create a game state that is winnable 100% of the time in the draft. And then, so this was right after one of the first times that Graves got picked off in his jungle, and this was set up by Vision. This was set up because of the other plays that were happening around the map. They were losing control of the more, like in many ways, the more important side of the map, because Top Esports has the 2-dragon advantage. They have an advantage in the bot lane in terms of tower differential, and that allows them to get vision in the FPX's red side jungle, which makes it more easy to take future dragons. So their vision control in FPX's jungle will help them secure more dragons in the future. And the reason why that's so important is because it's just good fundamentals. If you're in a winning position, you could just think to yourself, we have more gold than the other team. If a team fight breaks out, we're going to win in most scenarios. By pushing your vision into the enemy jungle, you are eliminating some of the winning chances for the enemy team because their element of surprise is limited. And that's really the reason why vision is so important, is because you can more easily anticipate your enemy's plan. Yeah. So right now it's about 1,500 gold plus the 2 dragons. So the gold advantage in the game is about so it's really closer to 2,000 because they took top tower. They have more tower pressure. Again, this is from Karsa getting a pick and using vision. So great job by Top Esports. I think that was a very good play, very intelligent play, and they need to continue looking for these spots. One of the things that you need to do against a team like FPX is limit the effectiveness of the globals, because globals can just fundamentally change team fights. So right now they're down 2,500 gold. So I haven't done any item analysis on this position. But I think that for the most part, the chance of FPX winning is pretty low from this point, because they're down 2 dragons, they're down 2,000 gold, and their items and the way that they build their champions doesn't outscale Top Esports. Top Esports has the scaling advantage from Ornn in this game specifically because they already have that 2,000 gold advantage. Lee Sin, the items that he buys for himself is good for his champion for a pretty long time in the game. But if it got to a 6-item game, Graves is going to be better on 6 items than Lee Sin's going to be on 6 items. And if the game goes that long, it's a very difficult thing to project. And most games are decided well before that, so you don't really pick for the 6-item outcome. You pick for the early game, mid game, and then try to stay close enough so that you can win a team fight in the late game. So really by this point, I think the game is already decided. I think that the chances are very high that Top Esports converts this lead from a winning position. So Graves dies again, 23 seconds until the dragon comes up. That means that they're going to get the third dragon unless Top Esports plays this incorrectly. Their vision control in the jungle makes it less likely they're going to make a horrible mistake. And I think they get the dragon. Don't really remember. Yeah, so FPX knows from this position it's way too risky to actually go for the dragon. And at that point, I mean, the game is over, so let's just go to the next draft. Or actually, let's not go to the next draft. So let's go back to the blind pick and talk about the different ways that this game could have gone and why I'm still fine saying that I think FPX from this position, it was much closer than the game made it look. So if they ran this exact same draft back again, most people would think that the chances of Top Esports was like 70% or something like that, just because of how the game looked. But in reality, the outcome that we saw was like a 70th percentile outcome, when in reality, if one of those ganks doesn't go Top Esports' way, if they don't get first blood, if they don't secure that first dragon, if Karsa can't find these picks in the mid game, in the early game and mid game, then FPX could have easily won that game by either outpacing the other team. Because once Graves gets like a level or 2 advantage over Lee Sin, they're going to have much better objective control. They have the global ultimates. They have the wombo combo between Wukong and Galio. They have the pick potential the same as Top Esports in the bot lane. Top Esports will always have the one-shot potential from Syndra, but it's difficult to say that that is much better than Galio, because Galio could reactively ultimate one of his teammates to limit the effectiveness of a Syndra ultimate, as long as he doesn't use it to engage with Wukong. If he engages with Wukong, almost every single time that he does that, it's going to be a good engage, and that engage should be more impactful than the Syndra ultimate. So yeah, I think that they had this in mind because the combo should be very strong in the early and mid game. The game didn't go the way that they wanted it to. I don't think that it was a bad blind pick, and Top Esports is a good team. I'm not doubting that. I'm not saying that Knight isn't a good player. I'm just saying him on Syndra is better than almost anything else that he plays, right? I think that's true. All right. So let's go into the next pick ban. So we see FPX ban Ezreal, Syndra, and Trundle. So this tells me that they don't care about Lee Sin because they think that they don't care about Karsa picking Lee Sin in the first rotation because their plan is to pick Aphelios if it's left up. Top Esports is placing a high value on Ornn, which I think is smart. I think Ornn's a very good champion. Let's see how the rest of the draft goes, because I forget. Actually, I can speed it up. Okay. So these are the champions that are going to be played, but they haven't traded with their teammates yet. So we have an Aphelios pick. Aphelios is considered one of the best champions in League of Legends, even after some of his small nerfs, because he can take on an entire enemy team by himself if he gets ahead, which is it's like an attribute that not every champion has. Misfortune can't do that. Graves can't do that, and Corki can't really do that. They can't do it the same way that Aphelios can, but they are good champions. So we have Aphelios, then we have Thresh and Ornn. The Thresh pick is good because you're taking away one of Crisp's better champions, But Nautilus is another good one, so it doesn't really matter that much. And then we have the Ornn pick. I like that. Then we have Nautilus and Olaf. So the Nautilus pick is good with Aphelios, and it's okay against Thresh. But I don't think it's not a pick that's going to win you the game. The Olaf pick, I don't like the Olaf pick really, because they're basically saying we like the Olaf into Graves matchup. So at this point, I think a lot of the teams are outthinking themselves and kind of like saying, yeah, we know Graves is really good, but if we pick a champion that we think is good into Graves, then we're fine with you having potentially the best champion on the patch. And I think that's a fundamental mistake. I think that I really do think that every single game should start with Graves being the first pick on blue side. I just think it's way too strong. It's like having pocket aces. Like we talk about that. We talked about the poker analogy that Osimo was making, and how he always tries to play pocket aces. And in League of Legends, it's the same thing. I think Graves is the beginning of a draft that is pocket aces. So then they come back with Misfortune. So they're saying, we think that Misfortune against Aphelios is pretty good. It seems to be conventional thought at this point. Most teams would probably agree with that, because this means that you're playing more around a different power spike than Aphelios. Like Aphelios will outscale Misfortune, but her ultimate's really good. So if you get ahead and can fight in a choke point, she can be really impactful in a team fight. The next stage of the draft, we had Jarvan and Lee Sin banned. So they're saying, we want you to pick Graves. We don't care if you pick Graves, because they have something planned. So this is a Khan special. I've never seen Khan play Kayle before. I don't know if it's something that he has practiced for like a very long time, but there's something about Kayle on this patch that they feel like is an advantage. So patch 10.10, which is now gone, nobody else was doing this. So someone who says, oh, Kayle is very strong at the end of patch 10.10, I would love to hear what they thought the day that the patch notes were released, because nobody was talking about Kayle as a meta champion or a very strong champion. But this shows that some teams do a little bit of extra work and think to themselves, like, in this draft scenario, what can we take advantage of from the enemy team? And what they're saying is, we are going to pick Kayle into Ornn. They're not going to be able to punish us very hard in the top lane, because they'd have to spend too many resources top lane. Kayle's going to be able to scaling Kayle to level 16, and once she hits level 16, they can't beat us. Or at least it's unlikely that they beat us. And I think that's an interesting thing. That's an interesting choice that they made. They also picked Galio. Galio is one of DoNB's best champions. So let's see. So I think it's important to differentiate between what outcome I was talking about and the outcome that we see in this game. So they do not win this game by outscaling with Kayle. Even though they have the better scaling composition, they're able to find plays in the early game that takes away some of top esports' winning chances. And this is something that's important to take into consideration when you're looking at like the range of outcomes, because in most games between these two team compositions, I would not expect to see FPX building an early lead in the top lane through a Kayle. That's just not typically what you see. There's nothing about the Kayle versus Ornn matchup that means she's going to dominate him in lane and be a bully. But now that she has one kill and one assist, she is stronger than she would normally be. So it's a good reactive play by FPX. So 2-1. They have a 1,000 gold lead. It's 3-1. They get the first dragon. Now it's 4-1. They take the first tower top lane. And they also had Rift Herald. They give up a few towers, but tower advantage is extremely important in League of Legends. They get the second dragon. They're up 1.3k gold. Now they have a 2-tower advantage, and at this point, like the difference between material chess and positional chess, this is the difference between material League of Legends and positional League of Legends. So materially, I think FPX has an advantage because they can outscale the enemy team, and they literally have more material than the other team right now. So economically they're winning. Like the gold efficiency battle and stuff like that. And then we have the positional advantage of FPX because they're up 2 dragons and they're up 2 towers. So that's very good. I'm guessing they're down CS, but not really important. So this is one of the reasons why Galio is so strong. He has a huge area of influence with his taunt and his ultimate. Now it's 5v4. They're trying to take this dragon because if they take this dragon, then Top Esports is forced to fight them on the next one. And, I mean, look at that KL ultimate. That ends the game. And that's not some kind of, like, insane mechanical outplay. That's really taking advantage of the game state because Kale gives one of her allies invulnerability for a short period of time. And once that invulnerability ends, it does damage in an AoE. It does AoE damage. I don't know why I said it like that. So this is a very interesting combination because it's like we know that Galio has taunt. So if Galio taunts several champions on the enemy team, we can KO ultimate him and he will do a lot of damage, or I can use it on somebody else on my team who's in danger of dying. But the dream scenario is getting it on after a Galio engage, where like he ultimates in, hits a bunch of people, taunts a bunch of people, KO ultimate him, and then at that point in the fight, they should have a huge advantage in the fight. Especially when you have a champion like Aphelios. Like it's such a good combination because if you get to a mid game team fight, even if Kale is only level 6, let's say they needed to fight around level 6 and Aphelios was in like a very aggressive position, you throw a Kale ultimate on top of Aphelios and he's unstoppable for a short period of time. Just a really cool pick, and it's something that's not really explored as often traditionally when we get into these like protect the carry compositions. Kale isn't a champion that comes to mind during like the first wave of innovation, but eventually somebody will always pick Kale and try it out, and it's difficult and it's risky, but when it works, you look like a genius. So at this point, we're 1-1. So let's take a look at the next draft. And this is where things get really questionable for me. I think that the blind pick game scared FPX like a lot because they're not even playing Graves right now. And maybe that's because they think Olaf against Lee Sin is like an easier matchup to exploit. But I still just think Graves is the best champion on the patch. Not sure what made them change their mind about that. So we have Ezreal, Olaf, Aphelios. Olaf and Aphelios are fine. Then we have Lee Sin and Yuumi. Lee Sin is probably Karsa's best champion. Yumi's a very strong champion, and Ezreal Yuumi is a good combination. Then we have Thresh. So Thresh Aphelios against Yuumi Ezreal. I mean, theoretically, Aphelios and Thresh have some chances to win that matchup by getting a good hook onto Ezreal, or by hooking Yuumi before she can go over to Ezreal. But if Thresh lands a hook onto Ezreal, he can just E out of it if you do it the right way, I think. So, not really countering themselves, but Thresh isn't as powerful against Ezreal as he is against other AD carries. So I think that's a mistake. I just don't like the Olaf, because in this spot they're basically saying we prefer Olaf against Graves and Olaf against Lee Sin. Like if you're doing rock paper scissors, it would be Olaf, Graves, Lee Sin, Top Esports is saying, if you pick Graves, we're going to play Lee Sin. If you pick Olaf, we're going to play Lee Sin. Top Esports is saying, if you're going to play Lee Sin, we're going to play Olaf. If you play Graves, we're going to play Olaf. And I don't know why that's better than Graves. These are both more early game champions. Maybe they feel like that's what they need from the jungle position to like get to the late game. But yeah. So then we have a blind pick. So we have Mordekaiser as a blind pick, which is fine. Mordekaiser is a very strong champion, but this eliminates the ability to pick something like Kale. And I think Kale would be a very good choice with something like Olaf as well. So we have Karma banned as well. So if you look at the pick ban phase, we have Karma, Rumble, Galio, TF all banned because of Doinby, and then we have LeBlanc, Zoe, Syndra, the 3 champions that I mentioned before, all targeted against Knight. Jackie Love on Orianna. Orianna just received a buff either on 10.10 or on 10.11, and I talked about how that is one champion we should probably look out for. So let's take a look. Patch 10.10. I'm pretty sure she was buffed on 10.10. Maybe it was 10.9. Maybe it was 10.8. Yeah, okay, it was on patch 10.8. So since the last time we saw League of Legends on patch 10.7, the next patch, 10.8, Orianna received a movement speed modifier increase on her W and an E shield ratio increased on her shield. So these are 2 very good buffs to Orianna because Orianna is always a good champion. She's very similar to Lee Sin. Her ultimate makes her valuable in almost every team composition. It's just there are certain matchups that are very difficult to play in the laning phase that you want to avoid. But with the 7 bans against mid laners, Orianna blind was something they were willing to try. Pretty good with Lee Sin. Just a what's it called? Ball delivery system. Same thing with Renekton. And it makes sense with Yuumi as well, because Yuumi's ultimate can root players, and then you send in Orianna's ball ultimate. And in a very like dragon controlled meta, or in a dragon control meta, her AoE ultimate controls a big area of influence. So then we have Orianna and Renekton against the last pick of Ryze for FPX. So Ryze is another champion that Doinby is well known for because of his ability to split push and scale extremely well and just get out of control. So in this game, Top Esports has a large advantage in the early game until FPX is able to scale. So basically, Top Esports needs to win this game or create a winning advantage before FPX gets to outscale them or put them into a position to take a disadvantageous team fight, which happens often around like dragons, the 3rd dragon, 4th dragon, 5th dragon, or when somebody's on soul point. So let's see. How do they create a winning position? So they have a 500 gold lead. They have a CS advantage in top, a CS advantage in mid lane. They got the 1st dragon. They got the Rift Herald. So FPX is saying, like, you guys take what you want. We're going to outscale you. We're not worried. They're at a 500 gold disadvantage. And that's why picking that's why picking Olaf just doesn't make a lot of sense. They basically picked Olaf to like try to keep the enemy at a distance. They want you to say like, you can take stuff around the map, but don't try to take too much stuff around the map because we might be able to kill you with Olaf if you overextend. So it's really like a reactive choice, or maybe not. Maybe reactive choice isn't the way to say it. It just doesn't seem like a good idea to play it out this way. Maybe that wasn't their plan, but then once Top Esports locked in Lee Sin and Renekton, they changed their mind about how they wanted to play out the game. Because that makes like the earlier dragons and the earlier Rift Heralds more difficult to contest. Oh, Yuumi dies. Okay. Still only 500 gold. It's 1-1 in dragons. Olaf dies again. So now there's a winning advantage. Not a winning advantage. There is an edge to Top Esports in the jungle right now. 1,500 gold lead. Mid lane has been continuously getting punished like the entire game, and they're able to take a tower for basically nothing. So that's a big advantage for Top Esports because it opens up the map. It allows them to get jungle control. And this is where the game is lost. So let's back it up and slow it down. So right now, FPX is probably saying in their voice communications, we need to contest this Rift Herald. We need this Rift Herald to equalize the towers in mid lane because it's going to be difficult to siege against them. What happens is Thresh gets caught out by the Yuumi ultimate, Orianna, and Lee Sin. Ezreal gets a good ultimate off. Thresh dies. Olaf dies. Orianna gets a good ultimate. Ryze dies. Mordekaiser dies as well, I'm pretty sure. And they get Rift Herald. So now they have a 4,000 gold advantage. And Rift Herald. This game is over. And the reason why I would say it's over is because now it's going to take so much more time for FPX to outscale the enemy team because Top Esports has gotten gold that they shouldn't have been able to acquire at this point in the game. And this game just snowballs out of control. So from this point, it's like Top Esports gets every dragon for free. Like, you cannot stop them from taking dragon, really, without them making a gigantic mistake. So now it becomes important for them to not make any horrible mistakes, whatever. Baron's very difficult to contest. Does he go for like a flash smite? So he just dies again. 15-3. Yeah, game over. Game over. So, let's go back to the draft. Do we think that FPX lost the draft? I would say no. I would say this was an execution mistake. They didn't play around Olaf's ability to win the early game against Lee Sin. They should have been able to win 2v2's mid lane. Actually, maybe not. Maybe they couldn't win the 2v2's mid lane. So what they needed to do was play around. What they needed to do was give away more stuff without dying. That's kind of what they just had to do, and they weren't able to do that successfully. They didn't play controlled enough or passive enough from that losing early game. Not a lost position, a lost early game. And now obviously there's a ton of pressure on FPX because Top Esports wins the championship with their next win. So let's get further into the draft. And this is partially what's frustrating, is that FPX is relatively consistent with what they think is strong in terms of Aphelios, but they're not consistent with with Graves being strong, or like the best champion. Throat's dry. Dehydrated. And the other thing is that they don't like Aphelios against Ezreal anymore. so they ban Ezreal, and they leave open one of Jackie Love's best champions, or one of Knight's best champions, Zoe. And they waste a ban on Lee Sin, completely wasted. Like, what happened between blind pick game 2 and now that makes you think that the Lee Sin matchup against Graves is lost? Like, why could you not pick it there? And if you think Aphelios is so strong, why don't you have any compositions that exploit Aphelios when he's picked? Like, there are a lot of teams that have compositions that attack Aphelios. So you could do something like pick Graves first. The other team has the option of picking like Lee Sin Aphelios. And then how do you pick against that? Because that's basically the game state that it seems like they're afraid of. They don't want to pick Graves first, because if they pick Graves first, then Top Esports is going to pick Lee Sin, and they're also going to risk losing Aphelios. But if you know the other team is going to potentially have Aphelios, then you can use the rest of your team composition to pick against it. So maybe they think that Graves against Aphelios, there's something inherently bad with that matchup. But it's just a lot of questions you have to ask, and it just seems pretty stupid, if you ask me. So then we have Blitzcrank. So Blitzcrank is a more aggressive option to pair with Aphelios. It's also an interesting draft because they're basically saying that we are going to build a large advantage throughout our team. Aphelios is going to benefit from that by getting like assists or kills in those like I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so getting Blitzcrank hooks, it's basically like you're trying to give a handout to Aphelios, saying like Nidalee is going to create an advantage that Aphelios can take advantage of, and he's going to get like a bunch of gold out of it. That's going to accelerate his ability to scale against the enemy team. So Aphelios against Kalista should be fine. Aphelios against Trundle is pretty annoying because Trundle can pillar you and slow you down. But I think that I do prefer FPX's draft. I think they just didn't execute again, which is pretty frustrating. So they get an early kill. They have a 1,000 gold lead. They are playing from a... Where are they losing all this gold? So Thresh Kalista is creating a CS advantage in the bot lane. And then they're also taking turret plates. So FPX had 1,000 gold advantage. That has been eliminated through CS and turret plates. When is his first dragon taken? Okay, so Top Esports is going for a play on the bot lane, while FPX goes for a play top lane. So they're basically saying, we'll give away Dragon, take Rift Herald. But in this spot, like, Top Esports is going to take Dragon, go bot lane, probably kill the tower for free, because you can't defend this tower without the rest of your team. And they die. Wow. And then they get the first tower. Wow. So this is a huge mistake. Now they're down 1,000 gold. Renekton against Zoe. Like, why would you even want that? Now they're down 2,000 gold. So they're down 2,000 gold. They're down a tower, and they're down a dragon. So they're losing in economy, losing in position, and material. Oh, I gotta write that down. So they're down 3,000 gold. Now they feel like they don't know they're down 3,000 gold probably, but they know that they're losing. And now they're getting desperate, and everything falls apart. Aphelios is by himself in the top lane, dies. Blitzcrank rotating up, dies, and the game is over. Any professional team should be able to win a game from a 4,000 gold advantage, in my opinion. They were trying to make a proactive play by pushing that top tower, but it just did not work out. All right, so that's the game. I think that I don't like the draft from FPX. I don't like Renekton into Zoe. I feel like that's probably not a good matchup. And if it is a good matchup, they didn't exploit the strength of the matchup, obviously. So that was an execution error. So it was either a draft error, execution error, are the reasons they lost. But it's not like it wasn't determined in the pick ban phase that they wouldn't execute. So they became kind of tentative. Still down 3,500 gold. Now they're losing another dragon. Down 4,000 gold. Down 2 dragons. Down 3 towers. I mean, lose another one. They lose the Baron. Yeah, so this game is over. So basically, I just wanted to take this time to like kind of look at these games, explain to people what I thought happened in the different drafts, in the different way the games played out. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between predicting and projecting, about how I look at games from a range of outcomes perspective. So like the implied win rate that a money line offers, within the money line, let's actually do that real quick. I think it was like Fun plus Phoenix plus 140. And 140 is equal to roughly 40%. So the sportsbook was saying, we believe the range of outcomes is that, no, we believe that Top Esports wins 60% of the time they play against Fun plus Phoenix. When they offer a money line, they're saying, based off of the range of outcomes that we believe the public believes in, based on the range of outcomes of public perception, based on the range of outcomes allowed by public perception, we think that Top Esports will win 60% of the time. Because it's not, I guess they're not really saying it that way. They're basically saying, in order for you to consistently make money against the sportsbook, Top Esports, you will need Top Esports to win 60% of the time. In order to hit the break-even percentage allowed by that money line. So it doesn't even necessarily mean that the sportsbook thinks that it was a 60% outcome, because they need to incorporate their edge, and they also need to incorporate public perception so that they can incentivize people to bet on one side or the other without exposing themselves to the risk of getting killed by bets. So I think that's kind of how you have to look at it. So like, again, the range of outcomes that the sportsbook is making you bet on is like, do you think the range of outcomes suggests that Top Esports will win 60% of the time? I do not think so. I think that Fun plus Phoenix should win 55 to 60% of the time. So I think that Fun plus Phoenix was a pretty easy bet to make, because you're getting a supposed like 10% to 20%. Like if you think it's 50-50, it's 10%. If you think that Fun plus Phoenix has a 60-40 advantage as a 20% edge, I would make either of those bets. So I'm still happy with my process and how I looked at the series. I think I could not anticipate Fun plus Phoenix moving away from the Graves matchup. That's one of the reasons why I liked Fun plus Phoenix. I said in order for Fun Plus Phoenix to kind of create the game environment that I wanted and that I was betting on, Fun Plus Phoenix would need to prioritize carry junglers like Graves, Kindred, Nidalee, and ban out mid laners like Zoe, Syndra, LeBlanc. The game that they won, they banned out Zoe, Syndra, LeBlanc, right? And it didn't work out in the blind pick because you can't ban anything, and they picked Graves, and Graves lost. But I'm just shocked that they moved away from the like Graves-centric meta. So that's about it. I think that went on for almost an hour, so pretty good. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any responses to anything that I said throughout the video, please leave a comment. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.
No, you don't need the.
I'm doing this my way.
He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend.
Talking on it though, then
He
you
a
can't work it
legend.
up later.
Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items.
Pike on money, pike on money, pike on money. We making pike on money. Payday, about to throw a rack on China. Need some DFS advice, where can I find some? League of Items got the sheet with all the lineups and all the stacks that you need to get to diamond. League of Items!
Getting gold, just to go, keep on winning.